The 19 box and occlusal preparation. Let's talk about it. First off, why do we do it?
The Class 2 box preparation is used to eliminate interproximal caries. The pattern of interproximal decay is gingival to the contact area as shown here. Since we cannot prep from the straight mesial or straight distal, the best way to remove the decayed tooth structure is through the occlusal. The parameters of your box prep are established assuming ideal conditions and are therefore rarely performed clinically. However, it is important to understand the structural concepts behind the preparation design. For example, you need to have 90-degree exit angles due to the orientation of the enamel rods. Deviations from 90 degrees can undermine the integrity of not only your preparation, but also your restoration. Of course, prepping to ideal is a great way to hone your hand skills.
So what burrs and instruments should we use?
There is no set toolkit for box preps. It all comes down to personal preference. In SimLab, you have access to a wide variety of burrs, and people find the burrs that work well for them. Be careful, however, about using less common burrs. In clinic, you will have mostly 330 and round burrs for most of your direct preparations. Let's take a look. The 330 carbide is considered by many to be the workhorse of dentistry. It is good for bulk removal of tooth structure as well as refinement. It's important to have a sharp burr. Dull 330 carbides do not cut as well and are more likely to burn your plastic teeth. Dull burrs, however, can be useful for refinement. 330 diamond. This is not included in your kit. However, you can find them at the dispensary. Diamond burrs in direct preparations can be a double-edged sword. The diamond particles on the burr make it super sharp, which makes it good for bulk removal of ivorine tooth structure. It allows for a smooth finish. Diamond burrs also do not become dull as quickly as carbide burrs do. On the other hand, because diamond burrs cut so well, they can make or break your preparation with the slip of the hand. That being said, many second years used the 330 diamond burr quite extensively for their direct preparations. Next, we have the mosquito burr. Mosquito burr is good for removal of unsupported enamel shells. Next, we have some hand instruments. Here we have the hatchet and gingival margin trimmers.
So how do I make a box?
Before I start prepping, I visualize the outline form of my box prep, exit angles and all. Where is the contact area? Where do I want my buccal and lingual clearances? Based on the anatomy of the tooth I'm working on, how should I expect to drill before obtaining gingival clearance? Once I have a good idea of my end result, then I begin to prep. I like to start at the marginal ridge, centered at the contact area. I will then slowly extend my axial and proximal walls all at the same time, making sure to create and maintain a good outline form. Using treetop or mosquito burrs to refine the interior box angles help.
So what should we do if we accidentally hit the adjacent tooth?
The best way to avoid nicking the adjacent tooth is to use an interguard. You can also prep your box and leave the interproximal shell intact, slowly reducing it until you are left with only an enamel shell. Slowly, with the touch of your burr or hatchet, you can flick the interproximal wall right off and not even have to worry about touching the adjacent tooth. If you do happen to nick the adjacent tooth, you can try to polish it with your polishing cups and hope for the best. This strategy usually works better for smaller nicks.
So how do I measure exit angles?
Exit angles can be assessed by drawing an imaginary line tangent to the edge of the buccal or lingual proximal wall, as shown here. So we drew lines that are tangent to the edges of the wall. Having enamel shells will make it difficult to determine your exit angles, so make sure to remove them. Make sure to continually assess your exit angles while making your box form. If you wait until the end, then you may risk sacrificing your proximal clearances to obtain a 90-degree exit angle.
Let's go over the basics to making a decent number 19 MO preparation. First thing, no matter what preparation, is to always check angulation. Recall that for the box portion, the angulation should be parallel to the long axis of the tooth and you should check with your mirror. The initial cut for the box should be done very conservatively. During study buddies, our tutors noticed that a lot of your boxes had a concave axial wall, rather than a convex wall that follows the outer contour of the tooth. Here's a way to avoid that. Imagine a fresh number 19 tooth. The dot represents the approximate center of your box preparation closest to the contact. Then, outline the boundaries of the contacts. You want to stay as conservative as possible, so you should stay between 1 to 1.2 millimeters when preparing initially. You should never prep to ideal measurements for an initial rough outline. Then follow a C shape that exaggerates the outer contour of the tooth. Once you widen this preparation, it should look something like this. The arrows indicate areas that need to be prepped further, allowing you to refine to ideal measurements. I recommend placing an inner guard when you decide to break contact to avoid damaging the adjacent tooth. Push out towards the inner guard and you will be able to feel when you hit the guard. It will feel much different than tooth structure. If you drill through it, don't panic. Just grab a new guard and place it in. Better to damage those than the adjacent tooth. You will always have enamel spurs left. It is inevitable due to the shape of your burr. At this point, once your contact is broken, always dry your tooth and check with the mirror for imperfections, angulation errors, and clearance. This is why it is important to be conservative for your initial cut. You always have room to adjust. Now for the enamel spurs. I recommend using a hatchet or gingival margin trimmer. Make sure you adapt the blade of the hatchet to the wall. If the blade is not well adapted, you can actually chip portions of the tooth by accident, as I have done here on the occlusal portion of the buccal wall. Here is an illustrated occlusal view of hatcheting. Note that a downward motion will cut more than an upward motion. For walls that have difficult access, you can use a gingival margin trimmer to better adapt the blade. Here's an illustrated occlusal view of using a gingival margin trimmer. If you feel confident, I highly recommend you try the mosquito burr. Go at a very slow speed around 2000 RPM and turn off your water since the tooth won't burn at that speed. Make slow, steady motions across your wall to remove any imperfections and bring your exit angles to 90 degrees and make your clearance to 0.25 to 0.5 millimeters. Be careful with this burr, it has so much potential for both good and bad. It is also possible to have an enamel spur at the floor of your box. This is due to pushing the burr down apically without pushing it out mesially. This can be eliminated and smoothed out with a gingival margin trimmer going along the floor like this. Here is a lingual buccal view of the spur. Be sure to place the pointed end past the edge of your box and swipe buccal lingually to remove the spur. Flip your instrument and go in the opposite direction to eliminate as close to your walls as possible. When you check for clearance, you want to enter with your explorer at the angle that follows the contour of the adjacent tooth. This allows for the smoothest entry and allows for an accurate check. For the gingival clearance, you can go from the occlusal, buccal, or lingual. Be sure to know where your 0.5 mm is on your own explorer as they all vary. A good rule of thumb is that if you see light shining through your contact at every point, you are at least in the under category. Now because your preparation looks like a peanut, the middle portion of the axial wall will most likely be tight. This is good since you can now refine to the ideal measurement. Be sure to constantly check as you push your axial wall back further. I like to place my 330 burr into the corners of the box to make it look sharp. Then I go with the mosquito burr to make it even sharper. This part is optional, but in my opinion, it makes it look nicer. Now to check your exit angles. A good rule of thumb is to literally use your thumb. Place your thumbnail as close to the edge of the box prep as possible without covering the edges. This will help you see the angles much more clearly. Let's give some extreme examples. Let's say your angles are way over 90 degrees. This would mean that the corners of your box is in the wrong location. To fix this, you would have to expand the axial wall buccal lingually in order to achieve your 90-degree angles. If this happens, be sure to follow the outer contour of the tooth. Now let's say that your angles are way under 90 degrees. This would mean that you have enamel spurs, or unsupported enamel, that needs to be removed. Be sure to use an inner guard and push those spurs back. Again, if you're going to touch the axial wall, be sure to follow the outer contour of the tooth. If you have minor imperfections or would like to make small adjustments, a mosquito burr or hatchet is your best bet. Here's an example of how the mosquito would be used to smooth out the walls and achieve a 90-degree angle. For the occlusal, few key points to keep in mind is first, your angulation. The angulation for the occlusal is perpendicular to the occlusal table, not parallel to the long axis of the tooth like the box. I personally like to trace out the grooves, but by now you probably have a method that works for you. Stick to it and be sure to refine well and follow the occlusal anatomy. Following the anatomy accurately will ensure that you have an even depth throughout the occlusal preparation. Once you have a rough outline of your occlusal, you will need to put in your S-curve. It is a lot less complicated than it sounds. The curve is made by smoothing out the corner that is made when you connect your box to the occlusal portion of the prep. This is one of the last things you should remember to put in during your refining step. Simply smooth out that corner. Composite doesn't like to be against sharp things. When you check your depth in the mouth, ensure that the angulation is correct for multiple angles. The faculty should have specified where they are measuring from, but if they haven't, it should be the shallowest point of the cavus surface of your preparation. Overall, this preparation in this video may not be perfect, but I hope it gave you a general idea of how to approach this preparation and avoid many mistakes that were commonly seen during study buddies. Good luck on your exams and stay tuned for the next video on how to fill this thing.